One, two. Oh, yeah. We're doing the speed right here. Okay. Yeah. Check it out. Yeah. Process extraordinaire with mad flair, but behind the scenes like I'm Tunnel Bear. I'm like one time like an OTP. Better get NWC for on the flow like me dynamically, whether VTE or MVP or guy looking to automate his LOP. Reach out your local TE, do a POC. Maybe with me, I'll dial in from JHB. Man, listen, be pausing my workflows for a minute. The Wiz Kid handling business, automating past the boundaries, thresholds and limits. Best to realize that I evangelize, give the people what they ask for. I kick it like external start or workflow start forms. Forget a task. Hey guys, Balisa here. It's a beautiful, beautiful afternoon here in Johannesburg, even though it's rainy. So today I'll be talking about a little trick that I've come up with on how to set up workflow error alert on Office 365. So the scenario for this is very simple. So you have a workflow designer who's built a couple of workflows on a SharePoint Online website, and they would basically like to be notified whenever a workflow gets suspended due to some sort of error on their SharePoint Online site. So for this video today, these are some of the tools that I'll be using. So obviously SharePoint Online on Office 365. I'll be making use of our Nintex Workflow, Office 365, SharePoint List Alerts, which is an out-of-the-box feature, as well as SharePoint List Views. Okay, guys, so now I'm on a SharePoint 2016 environment, obviously with Nintex Workflow installed. So this is what we call an on-premise version of our product. So if I click on the gear and I go into site settings, one of the things that you'll notice with Nintex Workflow is that you're able to manage what we called error notifications. So if I just scroll a little bit down and I show you what these look like, I just simply click on Workflow error notifications. And by default, what Nintex does is that it sets this up to send notifications back to the initiator. Sometimes that is not a good idea, because think of it this way. If you build a workflow and you go live with it and you roll it out to 200 employees and there might be a little bit of flaw in your logic or something might be wrong, you don't want all of these users to get an error notification, right? Because it will bring down their confidence in the system or in the workflow that you've put in place. So what I usually do is for any site where I might have Nintex Workflow, I set this to no. And then you'll notice that you can obviously specify multiple email addresses and separate these with a semicolon. And obviously this can be done on multiple levels. So if I wanted to do this for my entire site collection, what I do is I'll click on switch to site collection view, and then this will push down to my subsites as well. So as you guys can see, this is quite useful because it'll allow me to control my workflow error notifications. So I'm just going to quickly click on OK and save those settings. So now that is done, what I'm going to quickly do is switch over to my Nintex Workflow for Office 365 environment, just to highlight the differences for you guys. So now you'll see that I'm on a site that's on SharePoint Online. Obviously, you'll notice that if I just go into site contents, I've got both the Nintex Workflow app as well as Nintex Forms for 365. But one thing you'll notice is that unlike our on-premise version of the product, if I go into site settings, there isn't really a console where I can manage my error notifications. And unfortunately, that's due to that we haven't released this yet. This has been, however, been put on the Nintex user voice and it's under review. But when I thought about this, I was like, well, there must be some sort of workaround around this. So, I mean, if I go into my homepage quickly, you'll notice that I've got a link over here for Nintex Workflow History List. So I've actually built this in for myself. And you'll notice that we do also have a history list for Nintex Workflow for Office 365, just like we do with the on-premise version of the product. And the history list obviously has some useful workflow information like the instance ID, the name of the workflow, when something was logged. But more importantly, you'll see that under here on this description column, we have some of the messages that the workflow could log by itself. So I thought to myself, well, sometimes if a workflow gets suspended on SharePoint Online, it would be nice to get some sort of notification automatically. But thinking about it, the fact that this some of this data actually gets logged into the history list, it allows us to do that. So the first thing that I actually did was set up a view called Error Workflows. And if I just show you some of the filters on this view, you'll notice that I use the same description column, but I've put in keywords that kind of give me some sort of indication if a workflow has failed. So you'll see that under my filter, I've told this view to only show items when description either contains exception, because sometimes you get an exception occurred, error, or not found, which are some of the typical error messages that I get. And obviously having a view like this filters out my history list and allows me to see each and every single item that has that. And then I wanted a notification for this. So what I actually ended up doing was going into my list and using some of the out-of-the-box SharePoint functionality by setting an alert on this. So I've already built my alert. If I just show you my existing one, you'll see that I've got an alert called workflow error occurred. If I click on that, what I've done is I've just given it a nice description over there, and I'm telling this list that send me an alert via email when new items are added. And then what I've done is that I've told this to actually look at my error workflows view. So whenever the workflow goes ahead and it triggers and it gets suspended for whatever reason and throws one of those 3 errors, it's actually going to trigger this alert and it's going to send me a notification immediately. So I did run a dummy test workflow and these are my results. So I'm just going to quickly open my Outlook. You'll see that over here, I've actually used some of that out-of-the-box SharePoint functionality with the alerts. So I had a workflow that I ran, which I expected an error, and it's given me that workflow error occurred notification, which is the title of my alert. It's gone ahead and put in the item ID automatically. So alerts usually do this. But more importantly, I've got some of that information from my history list in there. So I've got my instance ID, the name of the workflow there, who the user was, the date that this occurred, as well as more importantly, my error message. And that's how you'd set this up in a nutshell.